Hi guys, welcome back to our next episode. My name is Nikki and I am the Managing Director of Ingenious Personnel, which is a recruitment agency, or you can call it a staffing agency. So on today's topic, I'm going to be giving you tips. I'm actually going to be giving you 10 tips on the things that you do not say in an interview. So if you remember correctly, last week we spoke about the type of questions that you can ask in an interview, and today I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to discuss what not to say in an interview. If this is your first time joining us, this is where we talk about recruitment, we talk about how to get employed, we talk about business. So please do stay tuned. Don't forget to like and subscribe on the channel so that every time when we post our next video, you will be notified. So guys, I'm gonna get to the very first tip because, like I said earlier, today I just want us to talk about the 10 tips or the 10 things or questions that you do not want to ask in an interview. If you missed last week's video, what I'm going to do is I will put up a banner above here so that you can go back and you can just familiarize with the type of questions that you can ask in an interview. So let's get into it. Tip number 1. This is going to sound so cliche because it's so random. It's such a random thing to ask, but trust me, I've been in the industry long enough and people do still ask this question. Question number 1 that you should not ask in an interview is, so tell me, what is this role about? Why would you ask that question? Because chances are there has been a job description that has been advertised for the role. That's why you're sitting in front of the hiring managers. And also, they wouldn't have advertised a role that they did not go into detail with. So you cannot ask, tell me what this role is about. But what you can do is, if perhaps you missed the job description, or if perhaps you are somebody that is applying for various roles, that does happen where you find people that will apply for various roles and maybe that person did not keep track on the positions that they've applied for and they get called for an interview that they are not aware of. So they sometimes not aware of what the job description entails. So if you are that person, what you can do or how you can rephrase the exact question, you can say, tell me, what is your expectation as an employer within the next 30 or 60 days from the successful candidate? So that's how you can phrase the question. You're still asking the exact same question, but you're asking it in a different manner. Or you can say, can you please tell me about how the how the day looks like in a weekly basis if I should get this position within this company? What is going to be my day like on a weekly basis? This is still the exact same question, but now it's being asked in a different manner. So you want to try and reframe from saying, can you please tell me what this role is about? Because when you do ask the question that way, it can be a bit of a put off to the hiring managers because it shows that you did not do your homework, or it shows that you did not do your research. So you want to try and either stay away from that question, or if you know the job description, or if you do not know the job description, you want to try and rephrase it using the different phrases that I've just mentioned to you. Let's move on to tip number 2. number 2. So tip number 2 is, you know, when they ask you that random question, and I've heard people saying this all the time. I hear candidates when I ask them, what type of position are you looking for? They'll say to me, anything. There's no such thing as anything. So tip number 2 goes back to that rephrase. And the question that you want to avoid asking your employer is, when your employer asks you what can you do, or what skills do you possess, can you do this, can you do this, and your response is, I can do anything. You can't do anything. It's impossible for you to do anything because you're not a superhero. So there's no way that you can do everything. You need to streamline what are your strengths or your values or your cause that you know you're strong in. Because if you're going to say in an interview, I can do anything, it's just not a good answer, and it's not a good reflection on you, because nobody is a superhero. So try and stay away from saying, or even, yes, from saying, I can do anything, or I can do everything. Even if you're speaking to a recruiter over the phone and they ask you specifically, what type of position are you applying for? Do not say, I can apply or I can do anything, because there's no such thing as anything. You have to streamline your strengths. You have to streamline what you are good at, and then you can use that now to map up or to map out what it is that you are good in. Are you guys ready to move to tip number 3? Tip number 3. So tip number 3 is, you don't want to ask about salary. You want to stay away from salary, especially if you are going through a recruitment agency, because a recruitment agency will be the guys that will negotiate their salary for you based on your expectations that you have discussed with your consultant, as well as if you are somebody that is working based on your pay slip. So that is what normally goes, that is what it is, the normal process. So you don't want to get into an interview and with your potential employer and ask them, how much is this position paying? Because as much as you want to know how much this position paying, but that is something that you can also do your own research with. If you are really curious on wanting to know how much certain positions pay within your country, because I also know that it's, you know, pays are different within countries and within regions. So you can either go on Glassdoor and you can go and check how much, you know, your role, what is the market related for your role, or you can also go on Salary Scale, and you can also go and check on Salary Scale. If you've got friends within the network as well, you can phone up a friend and you can say, how much does this role pay? What is the market related for this role? But this is a question that you do not want to ask the employer in an interview. So let's move on to tip number 4. Tip number 4. So guys, I know I'm also guilty, but that is because I didn't know and I was young at the time. Tip number 4 is, you never ever want to speak negatively about your previous employer, because you don't want to throw anybody under the bus. Not only that, it makes you look like a negative person. So you don't want to speak negatively about your previous employer, even if you know that, you know what, my previous employer was, you know, he didn't want to work, he was lazy, he was always out, you know, all those not nice things that you have seen. But when you go for an interview with a new employer, you do not want to speak badly about your previous employer. So try and stay away from speaking badly about your previous employer, because it does not make you look good in an interview. So don't put anybody under the bus. What you want to focus on is yourself and the value that you are bringing into the new employer. So that is tip number 4. Now let's move on to tip number 5. Tip number 5, guys. So tip number 5, I always say this to my candidates. If you have personally worked with me, you will know that I say this all the time. You always want to come across as confident, not cocky. There's a very fine line between confidence and cocky. So, you want to sort of watch your body language in an interview. You want to watch your facial expression in an interview, and you want to watch the tone in how you are answering the questions in an interview, because no employer wants to hire a cocky person. Confidence is sexy. Cockiness is a put off. So you want to come across as confident always, but you do not want to come across as cocky. For instance, if they ask you a question in an interview and they say to you, so tell us, Nikki, have you ever experienced something like this? Or this, or do you possess this skill? Do you have this type of skill? Have you ever been exposed to something like this? And you respond and you like, yes, no, that is cocky. So you do not want to come across as cocky. You want to come across as confident and not cocky. Like I said earlier, I said there's a very fine line between confidence and cocky. So when you answer the questions in an interview, come across confidence but not cocky. Watch your body language. How you sit in an interview is important, because your body language in an interview will it sort of sends messages on the type of person that you are. Not only that, the way your facial expressions, the way you speak in an interview, it also sends messages on the type of person that you are. So you always want to be professional in an interview. You always want to be confident in an interview, and you want to stay away from being cocky in an interview. Because if you go in an interview with a cocky attitude and with a mindset that says they need me more than I need them, I don't think there's an employer out there that needs you more than you need a job. So just watch out on how you present yourself in an interview. Even if you maybe have been recommended by a current employer who is employed with the business, or maybe you came highly recommended by a colleague, or a friend, you also want to stay away from the cocky mindset of, you guys, there's somebody that recommended here, and I've got all the skills that you need. I can do this job with my eyes closed. I've been doing this for 20 years. You want to try and stay away from that, because that is a cocky behavior. You want to come across as confident, but not cocky. So now that was tip number 5. We are going to move on to tip number 6. Tip number 6, guys. So tip number 6, we live in really desperate times where we are currently dealing with the COVID-19. We've heard on newspapers, on the radio, that there's a second wave that's coming. And a lot of people were really affected by the first wave, of which they lost a lot of family members. They lost their job. People lost their jobs. So it was just not a nice experience to go through. And now facing with a second wave, of which the president said last night that it's going to be even worse, it's just not a nice experience. If you are fortunate enough to be going to interviews or attending interviews, whether that is via Zoom or whether that is via Microsoft Teams, the question that you want to try and stay away from, or the behavior that you want to try and stay away from, is, as much as everything that is going on around the world, even if you have lost your job, you do not want to say, I really, really, really need this job. I'm so desperate for this position. You do not want to come across as desperate. So as much as you need the position, as much as, life needs to happen, kids needs to go to school fees needs to be paid, the rent needs to be paid, as much as life needs to happen, what you want not to do in an interview is to come across as desperate. You do not want to come across as desperate, because you're going to put yourself in a victim box where people are feeling sorry for you. And that is something that you do not want to do. So try and stay away from telling employers that I really, really need this job. Please give me this job. I'm going through a very tough time in my life. All those petty things you want to try and stay away from. We all understand that we are going through a very difficult time right now, and that is worldwide. So don't make yourself a victim in an interview, because you will disadvantage yourself. Let's move on to tip number 7. Tip number 7. So tip number 7, I am very guilty of tip number 7, because I used to do this all the time when I was younger. And I would say this to employees and I would feel sorry for myself. Tip number 7 is, you never ever want to blame answers on your nerves. I used to say, please excuse me, I'm so nervous. I'm not sure if I'm even saying the right things. You want to try and stay away from that, because you don't want to blame your answers on the nervousness. People know that you are nervous in the interview, because it's natural for you to be nervous going for an interview. But do not use that as an excuse of not answering the questions properly, because now if you say to the employers, I'm so nervous, I don't even know if I'm answering the question correctly, or because my nerves are just overtaking myself. So you are putting yourself at an advantage of you putting red bells to the employers. They're not sure if you are capable of making constructive decisions. So you need to try and stay away from saying, I feel so nervous in this interview. I'm so nervous in the interviews. That is not something that you want to tell your employers or your new employers or the interviewers, because they already know that you are nervous coming for an interview, because it's normal for everybody to be nervous when you're going for an interview, but do not make it known. Do not blame your answers on the fact that you're nervous. Answer the questions that you are asked, and that's it. Do not say, I'm nervous, that's why I'm answering the questions like this, because they know that you're already nervous. So let's move on to tip number 8. So tip number 8, I already made mention of this earlier when I was speaking on tip number 5, and I said, do not be cocky. Just because somebody recommended you for the position does not mean that the position is yours. So tip number 8 is, again, I'm going to make emphasis on what I did on tip number 5. Just because somebody recommended you, if that is an employer, if that is an employee, you do not want to say in an interview, I'm only here because Nikki recommended me. You do not want to say that in an interview, because chances are the interviewers know already that you have been recommended by somebody else. That is why you are there for an interview. That is why that you have been interviewed today, because you have been recommended. You possess the right skills. You possess, the right attitude, blah, blah, blah. But you, as a candidate that is being interviewed, you do not want to say, I'm only here because I was recommended. I'm so good because I was recommended. It goes back to tip number 5. So guys, tip number 5 and tip number 8 goes hand in hand. Just because you are recommended by a friend, by somebody that knows you and your skill, you do not want to say this to employers because they already know that you were recommended by somebody. That is why you are being interviewed. So let's move on to tip number 9. So tip number 9, guys, tip number 9 is you never ever want to not do your research. And if you have been following my YouTube channel, you would have noticed that on my previous video, that is called Interview Tips on How to Prepare for an Interview, I really make emphasis on research, prior research. If you missed it, I'll put a link somewhere here, guys, so that you can go back and familiarize yourself with that video on how to prepare for an interview. Because tip number 9 talks about research, as well as if you are going to an interview with a client, you want to research, you want to look them up, you want to see who they are, because you're trying to prepare yourself for this question that says, what do you know about us? You don't want to sit there like a doll and you don't know anything about the client, because that shows you that you have not done enough research of the client. So tip number 9, when they ask you this question, your answer shouldn't say, I don't know anything about you. I've never seen your website. I've never seen your ads. I don't know if you guys exist. I was just called by someone to come here. That is not the answer that you want to say in an interview, because prior to you going for an interview, you want to research where you're going. And like I said earlier, I am going to put a link somewhere here so that you can familiarize with the type of research that you need to do before you go for an interview. Because trust me, employers do ask, what do you know about us? What do you know about our business? What do you know about the position? Tell us what you know. They're trying to see if you have done your research. So your answer should never be, I don't know anything. I didn't even know that you guys exist. I've never seen any ads. I didn't even Google you guys. So please do research on the client so that you are able to answer this question. So let's move on to our very last tip, guys, which is tip number 10. Tip number 10, guys, this is the final tip of our episode. And what I want to say on tip number 10 is you never ever want to talk about the other competitor in your interview. So if you are going for an interview, let's say, I don't want to name businesses, but if you're going for an interview with client A, you do not want to mention their competitor. For instance, if they ask you a question in an interview and say, have you seen our ads? Or if they ask you a question in an interview and they say, what do you know about our products? Have you seen our products? Tell us about our products. Or what do you think of something like this in terms of, let's say you're going for an interview with a network company and they ask you about network questions and you mention a client that is one of their biggest competitors. So you do not want to do that. You don't want to mention their competitors in an interview. So make sure you know who their competitors are, and make sure that you do not talk about their competitors in an interview, because that's really a big disadvantage for you. Again, it will show that you have not done your research, because if you had done your research, you would know exactly who their competitors are. So guys, I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank you for joining me, and I will definitely see you next week. And for all those that are going for interviews, I wish you the best of luck. And for all those that are writing exams during this time, I wish you the best of luck. And I want to send a big shout out to my fabulous team. So I will see you next time.